Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. For today's video, let's look at some good old-fashioned misogyny, shall we? In the Daily Mail are running this shite. I had an affair with my son-in-law, and this is why my daughter is to blame. Oh, you know we're in for a good one. My mother always taught me that if you're not sleeping with your husband enough, he will look elsewhere. It's a lesson I tried to instill in my own daughter, Jane. You're an idiot. You're an idiot. Before she married, I implored her to be realistic about men's desire for regular sex and always put matters in the bedroom first. Sex is not something that should be done to a woman. It is something that should be done with a woman. It should be an enjoyable experience for both. You should also be able to have enough trust in your relationship and be with a decent enough person that, hey, if you're not having sex enough, you know they're not going to go bang someone else. Yeah? Your relationship should mean more than a fleeting desire or fleeting pleasure. Have you literally never heard of masturbation? But this woman, readers, is a twat, so let's keep going. Jane shrugged off my antiquated views, condescendingly, you're the condescending one, telling your own daughter that basically she should always put his needs to get off first before anything else. What if she was in a coma? Suppose it should just be understandable then that the man goes off and bangs around while she just lies there in a coma dream. What if something else happened? What if she's not in the mood? No. Condescendingly telling me no self-respecting modern man would ever act in this way, but I was proved right. Not really. Jane was proved right, because no self-respecting man would act in that way. And after they had their 3 children and Jane was busy juggling her career and motherhood, my son-in-law did indeed have an affair with me. Yes, you read that correctly. I slept with the father of my grandchildren, my beloved daughter's husband. Not beloved daughter, you hate your daughter. And yes, I'm daring to insinuate it was my daughter's fault for losing sight of her husband's needs. I can't actually say what I'd like to say to this lady, because I will get thrown off of YouTube. Leave it to your imaginations. Ironically, it was Jane who suggested Mike come and stay with me for 6 months due to a work commitment away from home. I had accepted, believing it meant I could keep an eye on him on her behalf. If you are with someone where you need to keep an eye on them to make sure that they aren't sticking their penis into anything that moves, you've not picked a good one. End that relationship. You shouldn't have to be worried that your partner is going to shag around the moment you dare stop looking at them. And yet, I found myself drawn to this funny, charming, intelligent, and very attractive man who told me my daughter refused to be intimate with him. Bet he was lying. Believe me, I understand why you'd want me crucified, but I'm not a heartless monster. Yes, you are. You're completely heartless and you hate your own daughter. I've read this already. I'm not jumping the gun. Believe me, she hates her own daughter. Listen, this wasn't just no strings sex. We developed real feelings for each other. Funny, because he basically goes there at the end. Real feelings indeed. Drink that opium, you weird bat. And both of us were desperately lonely after years of trying to deny deep-rooted fears that our marriages were off-kilter. Do you know what then? If you're going to cheat, lady, shag someone else down at the pub. Maybe don't shag your daughter's husband. My own husband, Pete, also worked away from home for weeks at a time. And when he was home, I felt like he didn't really see me. Not picked a good one then, have you? Skill issue. Whereas Mike looked at me like I was a goddess. Doubt. He was the first person in years who really listened. But I know what we did was wrong, so how can I live with myself? It helps that my daughter and I live in different countries. The reason Mike needed somewhere to stay in the UK in the first place. If I had to see her every day, the guilt would finish me off. I don't think it would. You are a narcissist. I was 19 when I fell pregnant with Jane while studying English literature. I was desperately in love with her father, naively assuming that he felt the same and we could raise our baby together. Sadly, he had no intention of sticking around. My mother distant with me and quite authoritarian. Good sentence, mate. When I told her I was pregnant, she was of the "you've made your bed line at school of thought." I was forced to drop out of university, telling myself I'd return as a mature student. I never did. What's worse, a horribly complicated birth meant my womb was removed, meaning I could never have more children. I'm gonna get told off for saying that some people shouldn't have kids. The types of people who will shag their child's partner, alright? Like, firstly, I'm gonna get crude. That man's mouth has been on your daughter's... How are you going to kiss that same mouth that has had his tongue right up her... What kind of freak are you? But basically, insecurity led this woman Insecurity, she hates her daughter. She sees her daughter as competition. We'll get there because it's all like subtly, not even that subtle, but it's all in this article. I think compelled this woman to shag her daughter's husband for validation and then blame her daughter because she's a sexist. You are not the type of person that should be having children, because like if the daughter doesn't find out, but if the daughter knew the amount of emotional damage, aka not the type of people that should be having kids. And like, what would you have done if you did have more kids? If she had more kids, I bet her sons would be precious angels that could do no wrong, even if they grew up to be like serial cheats or sex offenders. They probably could do no wrong, but her daughters would be constantly something to compete with rather than someone to cherish. At the time, I was too young to understand the ramifications, but goodness, I've cried over the years whenever I linger on it for too long. Adopt then. I actually don't. Look, if she adopted a boy, you probably would have shagged him as a man by now. Why are you looking at me like that for saying these things? You thought it too. In those early years, I utterly resented being a mum. What do you mean earlier years? Clearly still do. While my friends were out enjoying themselves and dating, by the time I considered dating again, I found most young men didn't want to be saddled with another man's child. I was incredibly lonely. Antiquated rubbish. If they want to, they will. And, considering this lady's personality is abhorrent, maybe it was that pushing the men away. Just her personality, but she found a way to blame having a child. Because I found in real life, in the real world where we touch grass, yeah, a lot of people are pigs, but a lot of people also aren't pigs and will forgive a lot or tolerate a lot if they like someone. The same way, it's not the same at all, but I'm going to say it. The same way that if you're a funny man, you can be ugly and a woman will like ignore it as long as you're funny and charismatic. So for all those men who are like, oh, the male loneliness epidemic, as if I'm meant to give a shit, which I don't. Oh my God, I'm on one today. I know. I'm just really wound up by star signs. Such an Aquarius, I know. I'm joking. But if a man has charisma and is funny, why do you think most male comedians are like kind of a little bit ugly, but you know that they're getting laid every single night? Anyway, I was incredibly lonely. Don't care. That said, I was besotted with my gorgeous daughter, Doubt. I moved back in with my mum, who helped look after Jane. She was far more affectionate towards her granddaughter than she ever had been to me. Age 30, I had my own marketing business, and when Jane was 8, we moved out of mum's and into a rented home. It was 5 years later, when I was 35, that I met Pete, then 40, at a networking event. He was my first relationship since Jane's dad. Pete was a funny, wise man who knew his way around a posh menu and had a cup half full approach to life. Mum said I was lucky he was interested. And while I smarted at her comment, she was right. I mean, lucky he was interested because your personality is dog shit and you have no morals, sure. But the rest of it, no. Like, the mum is just being sexist, and instead of this woman learning that her mum has her own misogyny, internalized misogyny to steal from, and, God, not to quote it ends with us, but instead of like this woman breaking that cycle, she's now put that cycle onto her child. I bet her child actually loves not living in the same country as her. Admittedly, though he did make me laugh and was reasonably good looking, I probably wouldn't have been attracted to Pete if I hadn't already been a mother. But in my situation, he seemed like a pretty good bet. All this to avoid feeling lonely. Babe, like, read a book, watch TV. Pete worked, and still does, in technology sales, and joked that airports were a second home. I knew from the off he'd always be away at least 1 week in 4. But when, after 6 months of dating, he proposed, I knew his salary would mean I could ease off with work and focus more on Jane. A year after we met, Pete and I were married. Jane, then 14, very much approved of Pete. She had worried about me being alone. As she progressed into her late teens, it was clear that we weren't particularly similar. She is extremely empathetic, the first to volunteer for this charity or that good deed, whereas I confess that's just not me. Yeah, I can tell. I'm far more outgoing than she is too. We don't look alike either. Jane isn't blessed with my willowy figure. I don't think it was the fact you had a child that was putting these men off of you before Pete. She is very much her father's daughter, short and brunette. She's much more curvaceous. You just know she thinks her daughter is fat too. Oh, wait. No, I didn't pull that out of my ass. Right. I'd always try to ensure she watched what she ate. I just know that this woman has body shamed her probably completely normal looking daughter her whole life. Like, who is she? Yolanda Hadid. Like, oh, Gigi, you can have this much of the cake. Oh no, we've been so naughty. Shut up. At 18, Jane went to university to study languages. After graduating, she travelled around South America and Europe. She was 25 when she met Mike, then 28 while they were both in Spain. It was her first serious relationship. I was thrilled she bagged herself such a man. Why do you exist for men? Jesus Christ. A tall, rowing type. He was charming to be around, had a good background, privately educated. He'd grown up in Wiltshire. Here, his father was a GP. I must admit, I did worry she was punching slightly above her weight. Why must you admit that? So firstly, the body shaming comments, because there's no need for us to know that, oh, she's short, much more curvaceous. I have to make sure she watches what she eats. And now it's, oh, her husband was too handsome, which I highly doubt it, to be honest. Her husband was too good for her. You hate your daughter. You are a... See you next Tuesday. Yes, I could see they were utterly besotted of each other. Always very tactile. Bet she was seething with jealousy over that. When they married 2 years later, I was very proud. At the wedding, Mike raised a toast to me, jokingly declaring me the foxy mother-in-law who he wanted to thank for raising such a perfect daughter, so perfect he cheats on her. Our guests responded with innocent laughter, Pete included. But deep down, I adored the validation. How sickening, how sad, how pathetic.
Dear Lord, what a sad little life.
And when Mike later insisted on a dance with me, I got lost in the moment. Pathetic! 2 years after the wedding, they decided to move to Spain. Both had been offered jobs in the banking industry, and Jane was thrilled at the prospect. 3 years later, their children arrived, 1 year after another. Jane and I became closer, messaging daily and chatting a couple times a week. I was so proud of the life she had created, but at times it did make me feel a little maudlin, considering how my own life had panned out. Ah, so you shagged him to take revenge on your own life being crap. As the years passed, Pete would spend his usual 1 week in 4 overseas. Our life was good, but deep down, I was lonely. That's only 1 week in 4. So 3 of the other weeks he's at home. Grow up. Then in 2022, Mike, by then 43, had to return to the UK for a 6-month work contract. I've been home alone all day. No one to talk to. Not been talking to anyone. I'm fine. It was Jane who suggested that as my 4-bedroom home was not far from Manchester Airport, I'd put him up for a bit. I was only too happy to help them out, and Pete was fine with this arrangement too. He was spending more and more time in the Far East, to get away from you, and had been lightly broaching the subject of us moving out there permanently. Given his salary meant that, now age 60, I didn't really need to keep working myself. The sensible option would have been to move out there with him. Yet I divot. The extra distance would make it so much harder to visit Jane and my grandchildren like you actually care. Like you genuinely care in a non-superficial way. Non-biologically driven, oh, I love them because they're my family, which is so nonsensical. You know my thoughts and feelings on that. I don't need to get into it. And so that winter, my son-in-law and I were mostly alone together in mine and Pete's home. Mike would stay with me for 4 nights, return to Spain for the weekends. At first, never having spent any time alone together, we were both very stilted. I had to keep asking Jane things like what kind of food he liked. Wow, talk to him, you're an adult. But after the first few weeks, I had worded myself to just relax. The first 2 months whizzed by, and come Christmas, Jane and the children flew over, with Pete also coming home. But then January began to really bite. It's such a long month, particularly as Pete was absent the entire time and due to stay away in February. As I had company, he felt relaxed about remaining where he was. At first, I felt miserable. Communicate. But then I began to realise how much I enjoyed Mike's company. Go to the pub and shag someone there, not your daughter's husband. For starters, he is more talkative than Pete, and attentive too, deferring to me over which wine to drink. Wow, how interesting. Or what to watch on TV. Wow, it's a real twin flame soul connection meeting of the minds here, innit? And complimenting how I looked on my way out to work in the mornings. We started cooking dinner together, and the wine we shared meant we had some really deep and interesting conversations. Are the deep and interesting conversations in the room with us? What could you possibly have to talk about that's remotely deep or even interesting? You've shagged your son-in-law, but I'm kind of bored to tears right now. He told me all about his childhood, his turbulent teenage years, and his plans for the future. He confided that he liked to travel around the world on a boat with Jane and the kids. Given how much of a homebody she'd become since being a mum, I told him good luck persuading her. We both laughed conspiratorially. Why are you slagging off your own daughter, weirdo? From then on, the little confidences about Jane began trickling through our conversations. Jane would never cook as good a roast chicken as this. Jane hates it when I fill up the car for her. It simply wouldn't occur to Jane to charge my iPad for me. So Mike doesn't really want a wife. He wants another mum, and that's why he shagged his mum-in-law. I never defended Jane when he said these things, mainly because I was basking in the unaccustomed praise. This is someone who shouldn't have kids. You should have to fill out a little form, yeah? Someone should assess it to see whether you are going to be emotionally capable of dealing with a child's emotional needs and not passing down your baggage onto them and riddling them with these issues. And look, the calls come in from inside the house with me because I also think maybe my parents weren't best equipped to have children because I'm such a genius compared to them that they aren't equipped to deal with my mental and emotional needs. No one was equipped to deal with my existentialism, so I hid it from everyone for a very long time until I started drinking a lot as a teenager. And I, quite frankly, would have preferred to stay in the void and be here and pay taxes. I never defended with Jane when he said these things. I didn't realise a line had been crossed until one night Mike began opening up about their lack of intimacy. How are you such a pick-me? Such a pick-me that you would shag your daughter's husband. It started innocently enough. No, it didn't. No, it didn't. That's not an appropriate conversation for a son-in-law to be having with their mother-in-law. That, or basically, your daughter don't shag me enough. Not appropriate. When I mentioned Pete coming home and Mike joked, I bet he drags you upstairs with an ironic laugh, it was obvious he thought it was unlikely. I had to smile because despite everything, Pete and I had always had a good sex life. Mike's face fell at my open blush. Lucky you. Chance would be a fine thing with Jane. Sorry, did he just go full Mark Corrigan from Peep Show?
Chance would be a fine thing. A fine thing indeed.
Then it all poured out. Jane had had a difficult birth with their third child 5 years before and had gone off sex. They'd do it just once a month, if that. That's more than some couples do it. Also, this poor woman has had to have 3 of this guy's spawn, had her body change each time, never to be the same again, not completely. Difficult birth, who knows what that means? Did she bleed too much when it was happening? Did she almost die? Did she have severe complications? Who knows? Because they don't really get into it that much, right? But she's gone through hell with her vagina to make sure this guy's genes are unfortunately stay within the gene pool. But he's complaining. She went off sex. I mean, if you had a difficult birth, wouldn't you go off sex? You don't want to get pregnant again. When I gently asked Mike if he'd talked to her about it, he told me he'd even suggested seeing a couples counsellor. Jane declined. According to Mike, she was more focused on their children than him. Man-child. Absolutely. She's there with 3 kids. 3 of the gremlins. And he's complaining, oh, she's more focused on the children. Grow the fuck up. You should be more focused on your kids too. I wanted to shake Jane. Yes, it's hard raising 3 children. How would you know? But she'd fallen into the very trap I'd once warned her about. Who cares about these man-children? I don't. If it's that much of an issue for him, then he should say, can we speak to a couples counsellor? Otherwise, I would like a divorce or an open marriage. And then she'd be like, oh, well, I like you being with the kids, so let's do the open marriage. And then he'd find he'll get no prospects, whereas she would get loads, because that always happens when these blokes try and do this. There was always the possibility Mike was spinning things. He definitely was. He's probably been shagging about and also making her look terrible so he could get something out of you, you dumbass. Good Lord, this woman's stupid. How are you going to be your big age, like 60, and fall for all these, the oldest tricks in the book when it comes to men? Either way, there was no way I could intervene. I didn't want to badmouth Jane, and there was no question of telling her what he'd said, but I felt for Mike. You pick me. Why do you have more empathy for literally some dusty fucking dude than your own daughter who's having to look after these 3 little precious gremlins in a different, I was going to say foreign country, but they're probably in one of the parts of Spain where it's just full of English people. So, but regardless, she's overseas having to deal with these gremlins and he's there trying to shag his mum-in-law. Get basically what the weekends he's with his family and the weekdays he's in the UK working and chilling. So he's a deadbeat dad as well. Why do men and the women that prop up these men? Because I don't support all women, because some of you guys are really dumb, like this woman. And I admit, I also felt angry with Jane. I knew what it was like to spend all these years as a young mum without a partner, how I would have loved the attentions of a handsome husband like Mike. I just know that he's like so fucking average looking. A week later, after we'd cooked dinner together one evening, our normal bottle of wine turned into 2. Sat across the kitchen table, Mike reached over to caress my hand, saying, "You're a very special woman, Laura." Why? Nothing in this article has indicated to me that she's special at all. What makes her special? I want to know, am I going to be told? Is this a Colleen Hoover novel? Am I going to be told instead of shown? It took all my might to pull away, but I did, saying I needed to go to bed. The following morning he apologised, and that night went home to Jane and the children. I spent the weekend wondering if I should call time on our arrangement. There was still 2 months left and we were dangerously close to crossing a line. Yet, in spite of myself, I was counting down the hours until he was back, feeling oddly excited at the thought of seeing him again. He arrived home with a bottle of Malbec and we cooked dinner as usual. We were listening to Neil Young when my favourite song Harvest Moon came on. Mike asked me to dance. Why, oh why didn't I say no? Because you hate your daughter and you're a pygmy. In his arms, he started nuzzling my neck. It made me feel utterly alive, lost in the moment without a thought for the consequences. I'm not sure who kissed who, but one thing led to another. It was incredible. I felt so desired. Get a vibrator. Or download Tinder and go cheat with a single guy on there, not your daughter's husband. If you're gonna cheat, don't keep it in the family. Afterwards, I was horrified, ordering Mike out of my bedroom and telling him it must never happen again. I was so consumed with guilt, I didn't sleep a wink. Doubt it. The next morning, I stayed in my room until he left for work and retreated there before he came home. He knocked on the door, but I pretended to be asleep. I couldn't hide forever, so the next evening I was waiting in the kitchen when he got home again. Call it chemistry, call it desire, call it complete and utter foolishness. I call it you being a... See you next Tuesday. And him too. And him too. He's not blameless. He has his responsibility, which is his family. I guess she's technically part of the family. But when I saw him looking neither embarrassed nor regretful, but hopeful, men. This type of man. Pond scum. The pull was too strong, and so began a cycle during those final 2 months that was both wonderful and torturous. During the 4 nights Mike was with me, we'd have sex each night until he returned to Spain on the Friday. He's literally having a shagging holiday and then going back to his wife and kids for like 3 days on the weekend. I'd then spend the weekend in tears, missing him but utterly guilt-ridden and hating myself. What was I doing sleeping with my son-in-law? How could I keep betraying my daughter? I don't believe you. I carried on my usual calls to Jane, but she never once asked how Mike was. She was looking forward to his permanent return, but it was just so he could share the burden of childcare. Hearing this seeming confirmation of what Mike had told me did make me feel slightly less guilty. Childcare is a burden, especially when you're by yourself looking after 3 children. It's not sunshine and rainbows, it's a burden. This woman is awful. What should I have told her? The truth was I wanted Mike to myself. What about Pete? Actually, I didn't feel an ounce of guilt on that score because while I'd never had any proof, I'd always suspected he was cheating on me whilst he was away. Well, you don't know that, so... It did occur to me that Mike might have been unfaithful to Jane before, probably was, but I never asked him. I didn't want to know. Our affair ended when he returned full-time to Spain. Once he was home, he rarely spoke to me, just perfunctory messages via social media. The absence of any acknowledgement made me feel like I was going mad. Ha! But I recognised that there was no way either of us could risk any references to what had gone on. And a tiny part of me realises he was probably just using me during those 2 months. Haha. 6 months later, I moved to the Far East to join Pete, who was none the wiser. He puts my mood swings down to missing my daughter and grandchildren. But actually, they were more down to the fact I viscerally missed Mike's presence in my life. Likes her son-in-law more than... Well, clearly more than her daughter. She hates her daughter, but more than her own grandchildren. And these are the same people that will put pressure on young people to be like, oh, give me grandkids, please. They don't actually give a shit. It's superficial. They want a little baby to look at whilst people are saddled with the burden of childcare. While I would be devastated if my daughter ever found out, I know I would not lose just her, but my grandchildren. I don't regret the feeling of vitality that my affair with Mike gave me. Would I ever do it again? The truth is, I just don't know. Anyway, Laura McGill is a pseudonym. Names have been changed because the Daily Mail is a fucking coward. Don't be a coward. Tell us who she is. Tell us who this absolute see you next Tuesday is. She is horrible. The Daily Mail shouldn't be printing such misogynistic garbage. And he's horrible too, don't get me wrong. Anyway, that's all for that video. Let me know what you guys thought of it. Did it enrage you as well? Just perfect rage bait. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!